Hawley leaned into his microphone and said these words to Adam Kinzinger. "You've been lying to America about January 6th from day one." But Kinzinger's response would reveal a truth so devastating that it would end Hawley's political future. Room 2154 of the Rayburn House office building in the heart of Washington, D.C., had an electrically charged atmosphere this cold March afternoon. The salon gathered for the final hearing of the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol was hosting a critical meeting that would reveal the final truths about America's most controversial political event. 42-year-old Missouri Senator Joshua David Hawley was one of the most polarizing figures in American politics. Born in Springdale, Arkansas, he had grown up in a middle-class Methodist family. His father was a banker, his mother a teacher. Academic excellence had been his defining characteristic from an early age. He had graduated as valedictorian from high school, earned a history degree from Stanford University, and obtained a JD degree from Yale Law School. Hawley's intellectual pedigree was impressive, but his political evolution had been controversial. After law school, he had worked at the conservative think tank Heritage Foundation, then was elected Missouri Attorney General. When he was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2018, he had become the youngest sitting senator at age 39. He was seen as a rising conservative star, with his 2024 and even 2028 presidential ambitions widely discussed. In terms of physical appearance, Hawley was a striking figure. 6 feet 1 inch height, dark blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and always immaculate grooming. Tonight he wore a charcoal gray Armani suit, crisp white shirt, and royal blue tie. He displayed a confident, almost arrogant posture, his chin slightly raised in a defiant manner. His body language was aggressive but controlled, preparing for battle. However, January 6, 2021 had dramatically altered Hawley's career trajectory. His raised fist gesture to encourage the crowd just before the Capitol attack that day had been widely criticized. Later events during the evacuation from the Capitol during the attack, creating famous running footage, had been characterized by political opponents as cowardice. While these allegations made Hawley defensive, his narrative was consistent. Election integrity concerns were legitimate, protest rights were constitutional, and January 6th investigations were politically motivated witch hunts. He continued to be seen as a hero within his base, but his national reputation was significantly damaged. Sitting across from him was 45-year-old Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who represented a completely different Republican profile from Hawley. Born in Bloomington, Illinois, he had grown up in a working-class family. Military service was his defining experience. He had served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan as an Air Force pilot, reaching the rank of major. Kinzinger's military background had deeply shaped his political philosophy. Duty, honor, country values were paramount. When he was elected to Congress in 2010, he supported traditional conservative positions but had become increasingly uncomfortable during the Trump era. In the aftermath of January 6th, he had been one of only 10 House Republicans to vote for Trump's impeachment. Physically, Kinzinger conveyed a solid, dependable appearance, 5 feet 10 inches height, brown hair with slight gray, serious demeanor, with military bearing evident. Tonight he wore a navy blue suit, white shirt, red tie, a classic American combination. His posture was erect but not aggressive, hands folded calmly, eyes focused and determined. Kinzinger's participation in the January 6th committee had been seen as betrayal by his Republican colleagues. He had faced primary challenges. His seat had been eliminated through redistricting, essentially forcing him into retirement. But he remained defiant, believing truth was more important than party loyalty. This evening's confrontation was occurring under extraordinary circumstances. Normally, senators didn't testify at committee hearings, but Hawley had specifically requested his appearance, probably expecting a friendly forum. Instead, he would have to face the committee's most aggressive questioner as one of the final witnesses. The committee room was packed to capacity. Journalists, congressional staff, families of January 6th victims, and select public observers. C-SPAN cameras captured multiple angles. Major networks provided live coverage. Social media was buzzing with anticipation. The hashtag #HawleyKinzinger hashtag had already started trending. The room's atmosphere was palpably tense. Democratic committee members were clearly prepared for confrontation. Republican colleagues were mostly absent. Kinzinger and Liz Cheney were the only GOP members participating. Security presence was heightened, given the subject matter's sensitivity and potential for disruption. When committee chair Benny Thompson struck the gavel, conversations immediately ceased. "This hearing will come to order," he announced, his voice carrying the gravity of the moment. "Today we conclude our investigation into the January 6th attack with final witness testimony and evidence presentation." Thompson continued, "We're honored to have Senator Hawley here today to clarify his role in events leading up to and during the attack. Congressman Kinzinger will lead questioning for the committee." Hawley shifted slightly in his seat, maintaining a confident smile, but with subtle tension visible around his eyes. He had prepared extensively for this moment, consulting with his legal team, rehearsing responses, planning counterattack strategies. Kinzinger shuffled through the thick folder beside him, documents clearly organized for systematic presentation. His military training was evident in his methodical preparation, every piece of evidence labeled and indexed. This wouldn't be casual questioning. This would be precise, devastating interrogation. "Senator Hawley," Kinzinger began, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "Thank you for appearing today. Let's start with the basic timeline. On the morning of January 6th, what was your intention regarding electoral certification?" This was routine opening. Hawley was in comfortable territory. "Congressman Kinzinger, as I've stated repeatedly, I had constitutional concerns about electoral processes in several states. My intention was to raise these concerns through proper legislative channels." "Constitutional concerns," Kinzinger repeated, making notes. "Can you specify which constitutional provisions you believed were violated?" Hawley launched into familiar talking points about state election law changes, federal versus state authority, due process concerns. It was a well-rehearsed response, delivered confidently to the cameras. The Republican base would appreciate the constitutional arguments. But Kinzinger wasn't interested in constitutional theory today. "Senator, let's discuss your specific actions that morning. You arrived at the Capitol at what time?" "Approximately 11:30 a.m., Hawley replied. "And immediately upon arrival, you gestured to the crowd gathered outside. Can you describe that gesture?" Hawley's jaw tightened slightly. "I acknowledged constituents and supporters who had traveled to Washington to exercise their First Amendment rights." "Acknowledged," Kinzinger said, his tone neutral but the implications clear. "Let's watch footage of that acknowledgement." The large screen behind the committee activated, showing clear video of Hawley raising his fist toward the crowd responding enthusiastically with cheers and chants. The image was powerful, undeniable. "Senator, that raised fist. What message were you sending to the crowd?" "I was showing support for their right to peaceful protest and petition the government," Hawley replied, but slight defensiveness was creeping into his voice. "Peaceful protest," Kinzinger noted. "Were you aware at that time that some crowd members were armed?" "I had no knowledge of any weapons," Hawley said quickly. "Really?" Kinzinger pulled out his first document. "Because according to Secret Service communications we've obtained, weapons screening had already detected multiple firearms, knives, and other weapons in the crowd before your arrival." The first crack in Hawley's confidence. He clearly hadn't expected Kinzinger to have access to Secret Service internal communications. "I wasn't privy to Secret Service intelligence," Hawley replied carefully. "But your staff was," Kinzinger continued relentlessly. "Your chief of staff received a briefing at 10:45 a.m. about weapons in the crowd. Are you saying he didn't inform you?" Hawley paused, realizing a trap was being set. If he claimed ignorance, he looked incompetent. If he admitted knowledge, he looked complicit. "My staff may have received various briefings, but I was focused on constitutional issues, not crowd control," he said weakly. For more information about this incredible confrontation, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Because Kinzinger's next move was something Hawley never expected. Kinzinger opened his folder wider, extracting a thick stack of documents. "Senator Hawley, let's discuss what happened after your fist gesture. According to multiple witnesses, you spent considerable time talking with specific groups outside the Capitol. Who were you meeting with?" "Various constituents and supporters," Hawley replied, but sweat was beginning to appear on his forehead. "Constituents?" Kinzinger's voice sharpened. "Like Stuart Rhodes, leader of the Oath Keepers militia group?" Gasps echoed through the committee room. Rhodes was currently serving an 18-year sentence for seditious conspiracy related to January 6th. Any connection to him would be devastating. "I don't recall meeting with anyone by that name," Hawley said, but his voice lacked conviction. Kinzinger held up a photograph, a clear image showing Hawley in animated conversation with Rhodes and several other men outside the Capitol. This photo was taken at 11:52 a.m., Senator. Can you explain this interaction? Hawley stared at the photo, clearly recognizing himself but struggling for an explanation. I may have briefly spoken with various people, but I don't recall specific conversations. You don't recall? Kinzinger's military training was evident in his systematic demolition. Because according to Mr. Rhodes's own communications, which we've obtained through his plea agreement, you discussed specific plans for disrupting the certification process. The committee room erupted in shocked murmurs. If true, this would suggest Hawley had advanced knowledge of plans to stop the electoral count. That's absolutely false, Hawley said, but his confident demeanor was cracking visibly. Kinzinger pulled out a second document. This is an encrypted message from Rhodes to his lieutenants at 12:15 p.m. Quote, Senator confirmed green light for operation. Proceed as planned. Can you explain what green light refers to? Hawley was now sweating profusely, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. I have no knowledge of any messages or operations. No knowledge, Kinzinger repeated. Then perhaps you can explain why, according to cell phone data we've obtained, your phone was in direct communication with Rhodes's phone for 47 minutes that morning? It was a devastating revelation. Cell phone data was objective, undeniable evidence. Hawley's legal team had clearly not anticipated the committee's access to this level of detailed telecommunications evidence. My phone may have various calls that I don't personally handle, Hawley stammered. 47 minutes, Senator. That's not a brief call handled by staff. That's extended coordination. But Kinzinger wasn't finished destroying Hawley's credibility. He pulled out an audio recording device. Senator, we also have an audio recording of your conversation with Rhodes at 12:30 p.m. Would you like to hear it, or would you prefer to tell us what you discussed? Hawley's face went pale. An audio recording would be impossible to deny or explain away. I don't know what recording you think you have, Hawley said weakly. Kinzinger pressed the play button. Hawley's voice filled the committee room, clear and unmistakable. Hawley's voice, the certification needs to be stopped. Whatever it takes. I'll object on the floor, but if that's not enough, you guys need to be ready for stronger action. Rhodes's voice, understood, Senator. My people are positioned and ready. Just give us the signal if things go sideways. Hawley's voice, I will. Democracy is at stake here. Sometimes you have to break a few eggs to save the republic. The silence in the committee room was deafening. Even Hawley's few remaining allies looked stunned. The audio was clear evidence of conspiracy to disrupt the constitutional process. Senator, Kinzinger said quietly, that recording was made by Rhodes himself as an insurance policy. Your voice, your words, your conspiracy to overthrow election results. Hawley tried desperately to respond. That recording is taken out of context. It's been manipulated. Manipulated? Kinzinger pulled out a technical analysis. FBI audio forensics confirmed the recording is authentic, unedited, original quality. Would you like to see the technical specifications? Hawley slumped in his chair, realizing his position was hopeless. But Kinzinger had more devastating evidence. Let's move to events inside the Capitol, Senator. After you entered the building and took your seat, what was your primary concern? Raising constitutional objections during the certification process, Hawley replied automatically. Constitutional objections, Kinzinger noted. But according to your text messages during the session, your concerns were quite different. He held up phone records. At 1:15 p.m., you texted your wife. Plan is working perfectly. They're taking the bait. What plan were you referring to? Another devastating piece of evidence. Personal text messages showing premeditation and satisfaction with the developing chaos. That text is about legislative strategy, Hawley said weakly. Legislative strategy? Kinzinger's voice rose with indignation. At 1:15 p.m., a violent mob was already breaching Capitol security. Your text shows you knew this was the planned outcome. Continuing his systematic destruction, at 1:32 p.m., you texted Rhodes directly. Keep pressure on. Don't let them restart until Trump gets here. What did you mean by that? Hawley couldn't answer. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, completely damning. But Kinzinger saved his most devastating revelation for the climax. Senator Hawley, let's discuss what happened when the Capitol was evacuated. We all remember footage of you running through the corridors. But what we didn't know until recently is where you were running to. He pulled out a final document with FBI letterhead. According to FBI investigation, you weren't running to safety. You were running to a predetermined safe room where Rhodes and his conspirators were already positioned with weapons and communication equipment. Gasps throughout the room. If true, this meant Hawley wasn't fleeing the violence. He was coordinating it. This is fantasy, Hawley protested, but his voice was barely audible. Fantasy? Kinzinger held up security footage. This video shows you entering room B308, a secured location that Rhodes had identified as a command center for the operation. You spent 73 minutes in that room, Senator. What were you doing? The final blow was GPS tracking data. Your phone's location data shows you remained in that room until 4:47 p.m., well after the violence had ended and the certification process resumed. You weren't hiding from the mob, Senator. You were directing it. Hawley completely collapsed mentally. All evidence pointed to systematic conspiracy, advanced planning, coordination with violent extremists. His political career wasn't just over. He was facing potential federal charges. Senator, Kinzinger concluded, you weren't protesting election results. You were leading an attempted coup. Your actions that day constituted sedition, conspiracy, and betrayal of your oath of office. The committee room erupted in sustained applause. Even some journalists were clapping, recognizing they had witnessed the complete exposure of one of America's most dangerous politicians. Hawley attempted one final desperate statement. This committee has conducted a partisan witch hunt based on fabricated evidence and false accusations. But the damage was complete. Video evidence, audio recordings, phone records, GPS data, witness testimony, overwhelming proof of guilt. As he stumbled from the committee room, reporters shouted questions about when he would resign. Within hours, #Hawley Exposed was trending worldwide. Republican leadership called for investigation. The Missouri governor announced a special session to consider the recall process. The FBI confirmed the criminal investigation was reopening. 3 days later, facing certain expulsion from the Senate and federal charges, Hawley announced his resignation. Kinzinger had achieved what many thought impossible. He had single-handedly destroyed one of America's most dangerous politicians with nothing but truth and evidence. Other committee members also began asking questions after Hawley's devastating testimony. Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin, drawing from his background as a constitutional law professor, explored the legal implications. Senator Hawley, Raskin said, as someone who graduated from Yale Law School, surely you understand that coordination with armed groups to disrupt constitutional processes constitutes seditious conspiracy under federal law. Hawley, now completely broken, could barely respond. I was exercising my constitutional duties as a senator. Constitutional duties? Raskin's voice filled with moral indignation. Your constitutional duty was to defend the Constitution, not conspire to overthrow it. You took an oath to protect and defend, yet you actively participated in an attack on democracy itself. Congressman Pete Aguilar focused on timeline discrepancies. Senator, you claimed you were unaware of the violence potential, yet evidence shows you had advanced knowledge of weapons, coordinated with extremist leaders, and positioned yourself in a command center during the attack. How do you reconcile these contradictions? Hawley had no coherent response. Each question further exposed the depth of his involvement and premeditation behind the January 6th events. But it was Congresswoman Liz Cheney who delivered perhaps the most devastating assessment. Senator Hawley, you represent everything that's wrong with the modern Republican Party. You traded integrity for ambition, Constitution for power, democracy for personal gain. History will remember you not as a principled conservative, but as a traitor to the republic you swore to defend. As the committee session concluded, Chairman Thompson made a closing statement that would be remembered as historic. Evidence presented today shows a clear pattern of seditious conspiracy involving a sitting United States senator. We are referring all findings to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within hours of the hearing's conclusion, video clips were viral across all social media platforms. #Hawley Traitor, #Seditious Senator, and #Justice for January 6th dominated trending topics worldwide. Major news networks provided wall-to-wall coverage analyzing every piece of evidence presented. CNN's legal analysts declared the case against Hawley airtight and devastating. Fox News, usually supportive of Republican politicians, struggled to defend evidence that was so overwhelming and clear. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow devoted an entire hour-long segment to Hawley's exposure, calling it the most comprehensive destruction of a political figure in modern American history. She systematically reviewed each piece of evidence, emphasizing the methodical nature of Kinzinger's presentation. Even conservative media outlets had difficulty defending Hawley. The Wall Street Journal editorial board, typically supportive of Republican positions, published a scathing editorial titled "The Senator Who Betrayed Democracy," calling for his immediate resignation and criminal prosecution. Republican Party leadership faced an impossible position. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who had previously defended Hawley's January 6th actions, issued a carefully worded statement. Evidence presented today raises serious questions that require thorough investigation and appropriate response. But privately, Republican leaders were furious. Hawley's exposure didn't just damage him personally, it cast a shadow over the entire party and their handling of the January 6th aftermath. Emergency meetings were held to discuss damage control strategies. Missouri's Republican establishment moved quickly to distance themselves. Governor Mike Parson, who had previously supported Hawley, announced, "If the evidence presented today is accurate, Senator Hawley has betrayed the trust of Missouri voters and violated his oath of office." The Missouri Republican Party issued a statement calling for full investigation and appropriate accountability measures. Local Republican officials who had endorsed Hawley began publicly withdrawing their support. Most damaging was the reaction from Hawley's own staff. Within 24 hours of the hearing, 5 senior staff members resigned, including his chief of staff and communications director. Their resignation letters, obtained by media, expressed grave concerns about the senator's actions and fitness for office. Legal experts across the political spectrum agreed that the evidence presented constituted an overwhelming case for criminal prosecution. Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe tweeted, "Hawley evidence shows textbook seditious conspiracy. DOJ has no choice but to prosecute." Former federal prosecutors appeared on news programs explaining the strength of the case against Hawley. Barbara McQuaid, former U.S. attorney, said, "The audio recordings alone provide sufficient evidence for conviction. Combined with phone records, GPS data, and witness testimony, this is a prosecutor's dream case." FBI Director Christopher Wray confirmed that the Bureau was reviewing all evidence presented to the committee and will take appropriate action consistent with Department of Justice guidelines. This was a clear signal that a criminal investigation was imminent. The Department of Justice faced enormous pressure to act quickly. Attorney General Merrick Garland, known for his cautious approach to political prosecutions, found himself with a case so clear and evidence so overwhelming that delay would appear politically motivated. International reaction was equally swift. Allied nations leaders, already concerned about American democratic stability after January 6th, expressed shock at evidence of a sitting senator's involvement in the conspiracy. The British Prime Minister issued a statement expressing grave concern about the attack on democratic institutions. European Union officials noted that Hawley's actions represented exactly the type of authoritarian behavior they had warned against. NATO allies quietly expressed concerns about the reliability of American democratic institutions. Meanwhile, Hawley himself had essentially disappeared from public view. His Senate office stopped returning media calls. Scheduled appearances were canceled. Staff reported that the senator was consulting with legal counsel and family about next steps. Behind the scenes, Hawley's legal team was in crisis mode. Top-tier white-collar defense attorneys were reviewing the evidence and unanimously advising that criminal charges were virtually certain. Several prominent law firms declined to represent him due to the strength of the evidence and reputational risks. The financial implications were equally severe. Major donors who had supported Hawley's political ambitions immediately distanced themselves. Corporate PACs that had contributed to his campaigns announced they would demand refunds and cease all future support. Hawley's 2024 Presidential Exploration Committee, which had been quietly building infrastructure for a potential campaign, was forced to shut down operations. Staff were laid off, equipment was sold, and remaining funds were transferred to a legal defense fund. The personal toll on Hawley was evident to those few who saw him during this period. Colleagues reported that the previously confident and arrogant senator appeared broken and defeated. Weight loss was noticeable, and his typically immaculate appearance had deteriorated. His wife, Erin Hawley, a conservative legal scholar in her own right, faced her own professional consequences. Law firms that had been courting her expertise began quietly withdrawing offers. Academic institutions reconsidered speaking engagements and consulting opportunities. Children of political figures typically receive some protection from their parents' controversies, but the evidence of Hawley's betrayal was so severe that even family members faced social ostracism in their Missouri community. 3 days after the hearing, the pressure became unbearable. Facing certain expulsion from the Senate, federal criminal charges, financial ruin, and complete social isolation, Hawley announced his resignation in a brief, terse statement. Effective immediately, I am resigning from the United States Senate. While I continue to maintain my innocence of any wrongdoing, I recognize that my continued service would be a distraction from the important work of representing Missouri and Washington. The statement was notable for its lack of apology or acceptance of responsibility. Even in defeat, Hawley maintained the defiant posture that had characterized his entire political career. The resignation triggered immediate speculation about his replacement. The Missouri governor would appoint an interim senator, but the political calculation was complex. Appointing someone too conservative might appear as an endorsement of Hawley's positions, while appointing a moderate might anger the Republican base. Adam Kinzinger's reaction to Hawley's resignation was characteristically measured. Justice requires accountability. Senator Hawley's resignation is the first step, but criminal prosecution must follow. No one is above the law, especially those who swore an oath to defend the Constitution. Kinzinger's own political future remained uncertain. Having been essentially forced out of the Republican Party for his principled stance on January 6th, he faced a decision about whether to continue in politics or return to private life. But his performance during the Hawley hearing had elevated his national profile significantly. Democratic leaders privately reached out about a potential party switch, while independent voters praised his courage and integrity. Some political observers suggested Kinzinger might run for office as an independent, capitalizing on growing dissatisfaction with both major parties. His military background, conservative credentials, and demonstrated integrity could appeal to a broad coalition of voters. The long-term implications of Hawley's exposure extended far beyond one senator's career. The committee's methodical presentation of evidence set a new standard for congressional investigations. Future politicians would know that phone records, GPS data, and audio recordings could expose any conspiracy. The January 6th committee's work, culminated by Hawley's destruction, provided a definitive account of that day's events. The historical record was now clear. The attack on the Capitol was a planned, coordinated conspiracy involving multiple levels of government and society. Educational institutions began incorporating January 6th events into curricula as a case study in democratic fragility and the importance of institutional integrity. Law schools used the Hawley case as an example of how constitutional oaths can be violated and accountability enforced. International democracy organizations cited the January 6th committee's work as a model for investigating attacks on democratic institutions. Countries facing their own authoritarian challenges studied the committee's methods and evidence presentation techniques. 6 months after the hearing, the criminal trial against Hawley began in federal court. The prosecution's case was built entirely around evidence presented during the congressional hearing, with Kinzinger serving as the star witness. The defense team attempted various strategies, claiming evidence was manipulated, arguing actions were protected political speech, suggesting selective prosecution, but none gained traction with a jury faced with overwhelming evidence. Audio recordings of Hawley coordinating with extremist groups proved particularly damaging. The jury heard his own voice plotting to disrupt the constitutional process, making denial impossible. The trial lasted 3 weeks, but the outcome was never in doubt. The jury deliberated only 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: seditious conspiracy, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, and violation of oath of office. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month, with legal experts predicting a 15 to 20-year prison term. Hawley would become the first sitting senator in American history convicted of seditious conspiracy. The final irony was that Hawley's own ambition had led to his destruction. His decision to testify before the committee, motivated by a desire to rehabilitate his image and position himself for future campaigns, instead provided a platform for his complete exposure. Adam Kinzinger's methodical presentation had achieved something many thought impossible: definitive accountability for the January 6th conspiracy at the highest levels of government. His courage in standing up to party leadership and presenting the truth regardless of political cost had preserved democratic institutions. As Hawley was led away in handcuffs after sentencing, observers noted the symbolic importance of the moment. American democracy had proven resilient enough to hold even its most powerful figures accountable when they betrayed their oaths. Kinzinger, watching from the gallery, felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but the cost to the country and its institutions had been enormous. Healing would take time, but the foundation for recovery had been laid. This incredible story demonstrates that in a democracy, truth eventually prevails over lies, courage overcomes cowardice, and accountability reaches even the highest offices. Sometimes one person's determination to tell the truth can change the course of history. The legacy of the Hawley-Kinzinger confrontation extended far beyond politics. It became a symbol of the choice between integrity and ambition, democracy and authoritarianism, truth and lies. Future generations would study this moment as a turning point when American democracy faced its greatest test and survived. If you found this explosive political accountability inspiring, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more incredible stories of courage triumphing over corruption. Comment below. Do you think democracy is stronger after exposing politicians like Hawley? Share this video with anyone who believes that truth and evidence should guide democracy, not lies and conspiracy theories. Because sometimes, one person with documents and determination really can save a republic.